The distress beacon cut through subspace like a scream in the dark. On the monitoring station orbiting Saturn's rings, Lieutenant Ben Foster watched the signal flash red across his screen. His hands moved fast, pulling up the translation software. The message played in broken fragments, a voice trembling with fear. "This is Colony Transport Gentle Dawn. Engines dead. 50,000 souls aboard. Vorch raiders closing in. Anyone who can hear this, please help us." Ben's throat went tight. He knew that name, the Vorch. Pirates who didn't take prisoners, just cargo and slaves. He slammed his hand on the comm button. "Commander Hughes, we have an emergency." 3 minutes later, Commander Patricia Hughes stood in the communications room, reading the coordinates. The Gentle Dawn was drifting in the Ashfall Nebula, a region filled with radiation storms and debris fields. Her jaw set hard. "How far?" she asked. 18 hours at maximum burn," Ben said. "But ma'am, the Galactic Council is already organizing a response fleet." Patricia pulled up the Council's planned route on the display. 7 days. Those people had 7 days before help arrived. She looked at the estimated time before the Vorch reached them. 20 hours, maybe less. "Get me the fleet," she ordered. "All ships, we're moving now." Within the hour, 8 human destroyers broke orbit from the Titan shipyards. The lead ship, relentless, pushed its engines to levels that made the hull groan. Inside the cramped corridors, crew members strapped into their stations and prepared for the kind of journey that would tear apart most ships in the galaxy. On the observation deck, Neil gripped the safety rail with 3 of his 4 arms. He was Realm, the same species as the people trapped on that colony ship. The Galactic Council had sent him to observe human military operations, to file reports about their capabilities. Now he was stuck on a vessel racing toward danger at speeds that made his internal organs shift uncomfortably. A human crew member walked past him, barely noticing the angle of the deck as the ship accelerated. Neil's species built ships with artificial gravity so perfect you couldn't tell you were moving. Human ships didn't bother with such luxuries. The gravity flickered sometimes. The walls conducted heat from the engines, making everything warm to the touch. Radiation levels were high enough that Neil had to wear a protective suit at all times. "You should sit down," the crew member called back to him. Her name was Amy, an engineer barely old enough to be called an adult by human standards. "It's going to get rougher." "Rougher?" Neil's voice came out high and strained. "How is this not already at maximum capacity?" Amy laughed, actually laughed, as she checked a panel that showed engine temperatures climbing into what Neil considered catastrophic ranges. We're just getting started. Commander wants us there in 16 hours, so we're cutting corners." "Cutting corners will get us killed," Neil said. "Maybe," Amy agreed, tightening a bolt on a pipe that leaked steam. "But sitting here while those people die definitely will get them killed. I'll take the maybe." She walked away, leaving Neil to process the simple logic. Humans calculated risk differently than anyone else in the galaxy. They weighed certain death for strangers against possible death for themselves and chose to roll the dice. On the bridge, Captain David Ross studied the route through the nebula. The safe path would take 22 hours. The dangerous path, threading through electromagnetic storms and asteroid debris, would take 15. He didn't even hesitate. "Helm, plot course Delta 7, take us through the storms." "Sir, that route has a 30% casualty probability," the navigator said. "And doing nothing has a 100% casualty probability for 50,000 people who just want to get home," David replied. "I'll take 30%. The ship angled into the nebula, and immediately the smooth flight became chaotic. Lightning arced across the view screen, electromagnetic pulses that would fry the sensitive equipment on Council vessels. Human ships were built tougher, with redundant systems and shielded components designed to survive Earth's magnetosphere during solar storms. Neil watched from his observation post as debris bounced off the hull. Alarms blared, then went silent as crew members disabled them to focus on flying. The Relentless twisted and dove through the storm like a fish in rapids, its pilot making split-second decisions that seemed impossible. "Your people are insane," Neil whispered to Amy when she returned to check the observation deck systems. "Probably," she said, not looking up from her work. "My grandfather was on Mars when the dome collapsed in Sector 7. No air, no heat, no hope, but the rescue teams came anyway. Flew through a dust storm that should have killed them all. They saved 300 people that day." She finished her check and looked at Neil directly. "My grandfather taught me something. When someone needs help, you don't calculate the odds. You just go. Because if everyone stopped to think about the risks, nobody would ever get saved." 12 hours into the journey, the Relentless took damage. A piece of debris punctured the hull in Section 9, venting atmosphere into space. Neil watched crew members seal the breach with casual efficiency, as if explosive decompression was just another Tuesday. They were back at their stations in minutes. 16 hours after leaving Saturn, the human fleet dropped out of high speed and found the gentle dawn. The colony ship tumbled slowly, its engines cold and dark. Around it, space was empty. "For now, Vorch raiders on long-range sensors," the tactical officer reported. 4 hours out." Patricia nodded. "Good. We beat them here. Get our engineers on that ship. I want those people mobile and moving towards safety before the shooting starts." As human crew members in hazard suits prepared to board the crippled colony ship, Neil began recording his observations. The Council would want to know what he had witnessed. But as he watched these Deathworlders prepare to defend perfect strangers with their lives, he realized his report would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about Earth. The airlock hissed open and Pete Hammond floated into the gentle dawn carrying a toolkit that weighed more than most realm adults. Behind him, 5 other human engineers pushed equipment through the connecting tube between ships. The colony vessel's interior lights were failing, flickering on and off in irregular patterns that made navigation difficult. "Power's almost gone," Pete said into his comm. "We need to get their backup systems online, or these people are going to freeze before the raiders even show up." Inside the gentle dawn, 50,000 realm huddled in the central habitat sections, trying to conserve warmth. They had been drifting for 3 days, watching their life support systems fail one by one. When the human ships appeared, moving at speeds that seemed physically impossible, many had thought they were hallucinating from oxygen deprivation. Captain Lyra stood near the main viewport, her fur standing on end as she watched the human vessels take defensive positions around her ship. She had seen images of Earth species before, tall, bipedal, with forward-facing eyes that marked them as predators. Their military vessels looked brutal compared to the elegant curves of Council ships. All angles and armor plating, built to survive impacts rather than avoid them. "Captain, the Deathworlders are requesting permission to board," her first officer said, voice shaking. Lyra's ears flattened against her skull. Deathworlder. That was the Council's official term for any species that evolved on a high-gravity, high-radiation world. Earth qualified on both counts. Its dominant species had climbed to the top of the food chain by being tougher and meaner than everything else on their nightmare planet. "We don't have a choice," Lyra said quietly. "Let them in." Pete found the engine room by following the cold. Heat leaked from everywhere on the damaged ship, but the engine compartment was warmest because that's where the realm had sealed themselves in, trying to stay alive. When he cut through the emergency door, 12 realm engineers jumped back in fear. "Easy," Pete said, removing his helmet despite the toxic atmosphere. The chemicals in the air burned his throat immediately, but he smiled anyway. "I'm here to help." His face turned red almost instantly, eyes watering from the caustic environment. The realm engineers stared in horror as the human skin began to blister. "Put your helmet back on," one of them shouted. "You'll die." Pete ignored them, moving to the main power coupling. His hands worked fast, even as his breathing became labored. He pulled out a human-made power cell from his toolkit and began connecting it to the realm systems. "Your people need heat more than I need air," he said, coughing. "This will buy you 12 hours, more if you're careful with the distribution." He finished the connection, and the lights stabilized. Heat began flowing through the ship's environmental systems again. Only then did Pete put his helmet back on, gasping as the suit's medical systems pumped treatment into his bloodstream. "Why did you do that?" the realm engineer asked, watching the human's burned skin already beginning to heal at an impossible rate. "You could have kept the helmet on and worked slower." "Because I'm fine and your people were freezing," Pete said simply. "Now show me what else is broken." On the bridge of the Relentless, Patricia watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Vorch fleet was bigger than expected. 30 warships, each one designed for raiding and intimidation. Her 8 destroyers were outgunned 5-1. "Ma'am, Council Command is ordering us to withdraw," the communications officer reported. "They say we're not authorized to engage in combat operations." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying the numbers. If they left now, the Gentle Dawn would be captured within the hour. The Vorch would take those 50,000 people and sell them to the highest bidder. If they stayed, her crews would probably die trying to stop it. "Communications, send a message to Council Command," she said calmly. "Tell them we're experiencing technical difficulties and cannot receive their transmissions. Then cut the channel." The officer grinned. "Yes, ma'am, technical difficulties, understood." David appeared on her screen from the destroyer Defiant. "You know they're going to put you in front of a tribunal for this." "Only if we survive," Patricia replied. "What's your status?" "We're ready, crew knows what we're up against. They voted to stay." "They voted." "I gave them the choice," David said. "Nobody signed up to die today, but nobody wanted to abandon those people either. It was unanimous." Patricia felt something tight in her chest. Pride, maybe, or fear, possibly both. "All right then. All ships prepare for defensive action. We hold them off until the Gentle Dawn can jump to safety." Neil listened to this exchange from his station and felt his world view crack. The humans were choosing almost certain death to save people they had never met. There was no profit in it, no strategic advantage, no political gain. They were doing it because they believed it was right. He thought about the Council's assessment of humanity: dangerous, aggressive, prone to violence, all technically true but missing the context. Humans were violent when necessary, aggressive in defense of others, dangerous to those who threatened the innocent. "Why are you doing this?" Neil asked Amy, who was reinforcing the hull plating near his station. She looked at him with those predator eyes, and for the first time Neil didn't feel afraid. "Because someone once did it for us. Back when we were new to space, when we barely had ships that could leave our own solar system, we got caught in a solar flare. Our colony on Europa was going to cook. The Tenari showed up and pulled us out. Lost 3 ships doing it." She returned to her work, speaking while she welded. "Earth remembers. We remember who helped us when we needed it. So when someone else needs help, we answer. It's that simple." The Vorch fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel 4 million kilometers away, close enough that their weapons would be in range within minutes. Patricia stood up, straightening her uniform. "All ships," she broadcast. "This is Commander Hughes. In a few minutes we're going to show these raiders why you don't mess with Deathworlders. Make Earth proud." Across the fleet, 8 ships powered up their weapons and prepared for a fight they probably couldn't win. Skrell commanded the Vorch raider fleet from his flagship Bloodtaker, a vessel designed to inspire terror. Spikes protruded from its hull, each one a trophy from a defeated enemy. He had been raiding the shipping lanes for 15 years and never lost a battle. 8 ships, he said, looking at the tactical display with amusement. "They sent 8 ships to stop us." His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Grish, studied the sensor readings more carefully. "Commander, those are human vessels, Deathworlder class." Skrell waved a claw dismissively. "I've heard the stories. Overblown propaganda to make them seem fierce. They're newcomers to the galaxy, barely out of their own star system. What can they possibly do against 30 warships?" He opened a channel to the human fleet, expecting to receive a surrender. Instead, he got silence. No response at all. The human ships just sat there in a defensive formation around the colony transport, weapons powered but not targeting. "Strange," Skrell muttered. "Broadcast again. Tell them to move aside or be destroyed." Still nothing. The human ships didn't even acknowledge his transmission. On the Relentless, Patricia muted Skrell's third demand for surrender. "Let him talk. We're not here to negotiate." "Enemy fleet is spreading out," the tactical officer reported. "Classic encirclement pattern. They'll try to hit us from multiple angles." "Good," Patricia said. "Let them think they're in control. Helm, prepare maneuver Gamma 3 on my mark." Neil watched the human crew work with quiet efficiency. There was no panic, no fear in their movements. They had drilled for this scenario 1,000 times. Fighting against impossible odds wasn't new to them. It was practically their species' specialty. The Vorch fleet closed to weapons range and opened fire. Energy beams lanced through space, targeting the human destroyers. But the humans didn't stay still. The ships scattered in 8 different directions, moving with acceleration that made Neil's stomach lurch. "All ships execute random evasion pattern 7, Patricia ordered. "Make them work for every shot." The human vessels twisted and spun through space like dancers, engines burning at levels that would tear apart normal ships. Vorch weapons fire missed again and again as the targets refused to follow predictable paths. "Return fire," Patricia said calmly. "Target their engines. I want them disabled, not destroyed." The human weapons were different from Council military technology. Instead of energy beams that could be deflected by shields, they used kinetic projectiles. Chunks of metal accelerated to a fraction of light speed, too fast and too solid for most defensive systems to handle. 3 Vorch ships took hits to their engine sections and went dark, drifting without power. Skrell stared at his display in disbelief. How were they hitting targets at this range with solid ammunition? "Concentrate fire on the lead destroyer," he screamed. "Bring it down." 15 Vorch ships turned their weapons on the Relentless. The destroyer's shields flared as energy beams hammered against them. Alarms blared across the bridge as the defensive systems began to fail. "Shields at 40%, the tactical officer reported. "Hull temperature rising," engineering called out. "We can't take much more of this." Patricia never flinched. "Helm, bring us about ramming speed." Neil's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Winning," Patricia replied. She opened the fleet channel. "All ships follow Relentless in. We're going knife-fighting range." The human destroyer stopped evading and charged directly at the Vorch fleet. It was insane. It violated every tactical doctrine in the Council military handbook. Ships were supposed to maintain distance, to use their range advantage and shields. They weren't supposed to fly directly into enemy formations. But humans weren't Council military. They were Deathworlders who learned to fight in an environment where everything was trying to kill them. They understood that sometimes the only way to win was to hit back harder than you got hit. The Relentless plowed through the Vorch line, firing at point-blank range. Its kinetic weapons punched through shields that were designed to stop energy weapons, not solid metal moving at relativistic speeds. 2 Vorch cruisers exploded as their reactors were breached. The other human ships followed, turning the battle into a chaotic brawl. The Vorch had never fought anything like this. Their shields were useless. Their weapons couldn't track targets moving this close and this fast. The humans turned their own size advantage against them, making the bigger Vorch ships collide with each other as they tried to track the smaller, faster human vessels. "They're insane," Grish shouted, watching the destroyer Valiant deliberately scrape along the hull of a Vorch battleship, its weapons tearing through armor plating. Skrell realized too late what was happening. The humans had negated his numerical advantage by forcing a close-quarters fight. In this kind of combat, training and desperation mattered more than ship count, and the humans had both in abundance. "Pull back," Skrell ordered. "Reform at distance." But it was too late. The human ships had scattered his formation. Half his fleet was damaged or destroyed. The other half was trying to disengage, while human destroyers harried them like wolves, bringing down prey much larger than themselves. The destroyer Defiant took critical damage to its main reactor. Captain David knew within seconds that his ship was dying. The core was going to breach, and when it did, the explosion would take out everything within 1,000 kilometers. "Evacuate the ship," he ordered. "Everyone to the escape pods, that's an order." His crew abandoned their stations, moving quickly to the emergency pods. But David stayed on the bridge, hands on the controls. 3 Vorch cruisers were regrouping ahead, preparing to make another run at the Gentle Dawn. "Not today," David said quietly. He aimed his dying ship at the center cruiser and locked the engines to maximum burn. The Defiant accelerated like a missile, its reactor reaching critical levels. The Vorch crews saw the human destroyer coming at them and tried to scatter, but there wasn't enough time. The Defiant struck the center cruiser at full speed, and both ships vanished in a flash of light so bright it could be seen across the entire nebula. When the sensors cleared, 3 Vorch cruisers were gone. So was the Defiant. Only its escape pods remained, tumbling through space with their automated distress beacons active. Skrell looked at what remained of his fleet. He had started with 30 ships. Now he had 14, most of them damaged. The humans had 8 ships when they arrived. They still had 7, and they were still fighting. "Retreat," he ordered, his voice hollow. "Full retreat." The surviving Vorch vessels jumped to faster-than-light speed and fled, leaving their dead behind. Silence settled over the battlefield like dust after an explosion. The 7 remaining human ships held position around the Gentle Dawn, their hulls scorched and damaged but intact. Debris from destroyed vessels drifted past in slow orbits, reflecting the distant light of the nebula's stars. Inside the colony transport, 50,000 Realm had watched the entire battle on their emergency view screens. They had seen the human ships charge into impossible odds. They had watched the Defiant sacrifice itself to protect them. Now they stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Lyra's hands shook as she opened a channel to the Relentless. "Commander Hughes, this is Captain Lyra. I don't know what to say." Patricia's face appeared on the screen, and Lyra was struck by how tired she looked. There was no triumph in her expression, no pride at the victory, just exhaustion and grief. "Say you're ready to get moving," Patricia replied. "My engineers report your engines are fixed enough for a short jump. We need to get you out of here before those raiders come back with reinforcements." "You think they'll return?" "Would you?" Patricia asked. "We just humiliated them. They'll want revenge, and next time they'll bring more ships, so we need to move now." Lyra nodded, then hesitated. "Commander, your ship, the one that saved us, how many crew?" "The Defiant had 83 people aboard," Patricia said quietly. "We recovered all the escape pods. No casualties." "Your captain?" Patricia's jaw tightened. David stayed behind to pilot the collision course. Somebody had to make sure it hit. The weight of that statement settled over Lyra like a physical thing. One human had chosen to die alone rather than risk the mission failing. Not because he was ordered to, but because it was the right thing to do. "I'm sorry," Lyra said softly. "So am I," Patricia replied. "But he knew what he was doing. He knew why it mattered. Now let's make sure his sacrifice counts for something. Get your people ready to jump." The channel closed. Lyra looked around her bridge at her crew, all of them staring at her with expressions that mirrored her own confusion and awe. "They came for us," her first officer said. "They didn't know us. We're not allies, we're not even friends. But they came anyway, and one of them died to save us." Lyra thought about the Council's warnings about humanity, about how they were dangerous, aggressive, too violent to be trusted. Nobody had mentioned that they were also willing to die for complete strangers. On the Relentless, Neil moved through the corridors documenting everything he saw. The crew worked to repair battle damage with the same calm efficiency they had shown during the fight. Nobody was celebrating. If anything, they seemed subdued. He found Amy in the engine room, her hands deep in a coolant system that was leaking. Her uniform was soaked with the fluorescent blue liquid, and she had a cut on her forehead that she hadn't bothered to treat. "You won," Neil said. "You defeated an enemy fleet 5 times your size. Why does everyone seem so sad?" Amy didn't look up from her work. "Because David's dead. He was a good captain, a good person. We won the fight, but we lost him, and that doesn't feel like winning." "But he chose to stay," Neil pointed out. "Nobody forced him." "That's what makes it hurt," Amy said. She finally looked at Neil, and he saw tears mixing with the coolant on her face. "He chose it. He looked at the situation and decided that his life was worth less than 50,000 strangers. That's who David was. That's who we all try to be." She returned to her work, her movements rough with emotion. "Earth taught us that life is hard and unfair, and sometimes you don't get to survive. But it also taught us that how you face those moments defines who you are. David faced his moment and decided that saving others mattered more than saving himself." Neil recorded this conversation, but he knew his superiors at the council wouldn't understand it. They would see the tactical efficiency, the military capability, the dangerous potential of a species that could fight like this. They wouldn't see the grief, the sacrifice, the fundamental decency that drove these actions. 3 hours later, the Gentle Dawn's engines powered up. The colony ship, patched and barely functional but mobile, prepared to jump to safety. The human fleet formed an escort, their weapons still tracking space for any sign of returning enemies. "Captain Lyra, this is Relentless," Patricia broadcast. "Your jump drive is charged. On your mark." Lyra looked at her crew one more time. "Send a message to the human fleet. Tell them we'll never forget what they did for us." "Already sent," her communications officer said. Commander Hughes responded. "She says they were just doing their job." "Their job," Lyra laughed, the sound carrying an edge of hysteria. "Their job is to protect humanity's interests. We're not even part of their government. How is this their job?" The communications officer looked uncomfortable. "I think, Captain, that humans define their job differently than we do." The Gentle Dawn jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying its 50,000 passengers toward safety. The human fleet remained behind, collecting their dead from the Defiant's wreckage and preparing for the long journey back to Saturn. Neil sat in his quarters, reviewing his recordings and trying to write his report. How did you explain a species that calculated worth differently than everyone else? How did you describe people who measured success not in profit or territory, but in lives saved? He thought about Amy's words. How you face your moment defines who you are. Humanity had faced their moment and chosen sacrifice over safety, strangers over self-interest, hope over calculation. The council called them Deathworlders, and they were right. But they were missing the context. Humans came from a world that tried to kill them every day, so they learned to value life more than species from gentler worlds could imagine. They knew what it was like to struggle for survival, so they couldn't stand by and watch others struggle alone. Neil began typing his report, knowing it would change everything. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their ships or their willingness to fight. It was their unwillingness to let others suffer when they could do something about it, no matter the cost. 2 days after the battle, the Council rescue fleet finally arrived at the coordinates where the Gentle Dawn had sent its distress call. They found wreckage floating in space, the remains of 16 Vorch warships and 1 human destroyer. No survivors, no colony ship, and no explanation. Admiral Torvin, commanding the Council fleet, studied the debris field with growing unease. His sensors picked up energy signatures consistent with a major battle: weapons fire, reactor breaches, hull damage on a massive scale. But the Gentle Dawn was gone, and so were the humans. "Get me the communication logs," Torvin ordered. "I want to know what happened here." His communications officer pulled up the automated recordings, the black box data that every ship broadcasted during combat. What they found made no sense according to standard military doctrine. 8 human destroyers had engaged 30 Vorch raiders. The humans had 1. "This is impossible," Torvin's tactical officer said, running the numbers again. "The Vorch had overwhelming firepower advantage. The humans should have been destroyed in the first exchange." "Clearly they weren't," Torvin replied dryly. He pulled up the tactical recordings, watching the battle unfold in holographic replay. The human ships moved in ways that made his crew gasp, acceleration levels that should have killed everyone aboard, course changes that violated basic physics, weapons fire at ranges where missing should have been impossible. "They fly like they have nothing to lose," his pilot said quietly. "Look at that maneuver. They used their own ship as a battering ram." The recording showed the final moments of the Defiant, the way it deliberately crashed into 3 Vorch cruisers. The explosion was bright enough to damage the sensors recording it. "Savages," one officer muttered. "Savages don't win battles like this," Torvin corrected. "This was precise, calculated, and completely insane. They turned every tactical disadvantage into an advantage by refusing to fight the way we expect." He closed the recording and looked at his crew. "The colony ship is safe. The Gentle Dawn sent a message 3 hours ago confirming they arrived at their destination. The human fleet escorted them to Council space and then returned to their own territory." Without waiting for thanks or recognition, the communications officer added, "They just left." Torvin pulled up the file on humanity that the Council maintained. It was marked with warning symbols, classifications that labeled them as potentially hostile. The report emphasized their violent history, their aggressive expansion, their military capabilities. Nowhere in the file did it mention that they would cross hostile space to save strangers. "Update the file," Torvin ordered. "Add today's events to their record. The Council needs to know what these Deathworlders are really capable of." On Earth, in a small apartment in Seattle, a woman named Rachel Hammond received a message. It was marked official military correspondence, the kind that made her hands shake before she even opened it. Her son Pete was fine, injured but recovering. He had suffered chemical burns to his respiratory system while helping repair an alien colony ship. The doctors said he would make a full recovery in a few weeks. The message also included a personal note from the alien ship's captain. Rachel read it 3 times, tears running down her face. "Your son removed his helmet in a toxic atmosphere to smile at our children. They were terrified of humans, of Deathworlders, until Pete showed them kindness cost him his own pain. He could have worked slower, safer, but he chose to suffer so our people could be warm. Please know that 50,000 souls live today because of people like your son. We will never forget." Rachel saved the message and sent a reply. "Pete learned that from his grandfather. We don't stand by when people need help. I'm proud of him." 3 weeks later, Neil stood before the Galactic Council presenting his report. The chamber was full, representatives from 100 worlds listening as he described what he had witnessed. The humans designated their mission priority as preservation of civilian life above their own safety, Neil said, pulling up tactical data on the main display. They sustained damage that would have forced any Council vessel to retreat. They lost one ship and could have lost more, but they never considered withdrawal as an option. Because they're reckless, someone called out from the audience. Deathworlders don't value life the way civilized species do. Neil's fur stood on end, anger flashing through him. No, you're wrong. They value life more than we do because they know how easily it can be taken. I watched a human engineer burn his own lungs to bring heat to our people faster. I saw a captain stay aboard a dying ship to ensure it hit its target. I heard crew members vote unanimously to face death rather than abandon strangers. He pulled up the image of Amy working in the engine room, tears on her face as she grieved for her friend. This is what humans look like when they win a battle. They don't celebrate. They mourn their losses and get back to work. They measure success not in enemies destroyed but in innocents saved. The council chamber fell silent. Neil continued, his voice steady. We call them Deathworlders because they come from a harsh planet, but that's not why they're dangerous. They're dangerous because they refuse to accept that some people can't be saved. They look at impossible odds and they go anyway. They see strangers in trouble and they respond as if those strangers were family. He closed his presentation with a final image. The gentle dawn, safe and intact, surrounded by human destroyers as it jumped to safety. I recommend we reclassify humanity, not as a threat but as an ally, because when the next crisis comes, and it will come, we want them on our side. The vote took 3 hours. In the end, it was unanimous. Earth was officially welcomed as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges. They were assigned a permanent seat and given the designation that would define how the galaxy saw them forever. First responders. On the Relentless, now docked at Saturn for repairs, Patricia received the news via official channels. She read the message once and then deleted it. Politics didn't interest her. Awards and recognition didn't matter. What mattered was the alert that flashed across her screen 10 minutes later. A distress call from a mining colony in the outer reaches. Equipment failure, life support critical, 200 people trapped underground. Helm, Patricia said calmly. How soon can we launch? Ship still in repair, ma'am. We're not rated for combat operations. I didn't ask if we were pretty. I asked when we can launch. The helm officer smiled. 30 minutes if we skip the safety checks. 20 minutes, Patricia replied. And send a message to the fleet. Tell them we have work to do. 6 months after the Gentle Dawn incident, the galaxy had changed in subtle but important ways. Human ships were no longer viewed with suspicion when they approached Council space. Instead, they were welcomed, sometimes desperately so. The mining colony rescue had been the first of many. Then came the station fire on Epsilon Reach, where human crews had walked through flames that melted their suits to pull out trapped workers. After that was the plague ship quarantine, where human doctors had boarded an infected vessel that everyone else had written off as lost. They had saved 2/3 of the passengers and only lost 3 of their own people. Each time the pattern was the same. Impossible odds, humans showing up anyway, people saved who shouldn't have been savable. Lyra stood in the memorial garden on her homeworld, looking at the new monument. It was simple, just a black stone with names carved into it. David Ross, captain of the Defiant, and the 83 crew members who had been willing to die with him. None of them had actually died, but they had been willing, and that mattered. Around her, realm children played in the gardens, laughing and chasing each other. 50,000 people had survived because of the humans. Those 50,000 had families, friends, communities. The ripple effect of that one rescue had touched millions of lives. We owe them everything, Lyra's daughter said, standing beside her mother. She was young, barely an adult, but she remembered the day the Deathworlders came. She remembered hiding in fear and then watching in awe as the humans fought for people they didn't know. Yes, Lyra agreed, we do. On Earth, in the military cemetery outside Seattle, Rachel Hammond placed flowers on her father's grave. He had died 5 years ago, the grandfather who had survived the Mars dome collapse and taught his family that you help people no matter the cost. Pete stood beside her, his lungs fully healed now. He wore his uniform, ready to ship out again tomorrow on another mission. Another rescue, another group of strangers who needed help. "He'd be proud of you," Rachel said. "He'd be proud of all of us," Pete replied. "We're doing what he taught us. What Earth taught all of us." Rachel thought about that. Earth, the death world, the planet that tried to kill humanity for millions of years. It had made them tough, yes, but it had also made them value every single life because they knew how fragile life was. They knew what it cost to survive, so they couldn't stand by and watch others fail to survive when help was possible. "Do you ever wish you'd chosen an easier life?" Rachel asked. "Something safer?" Pete smiled. "Every time I get hurt, every time I'm scared, every time I watch a friend take a risk that might kill them." He paused, looking at his grandfather's name on the stone. "But then I think about the people who are alive because we didn't choose easier. The kids on the Gentle Dawn who were terrified until I showed them we weren't monsters. The miners on Epsilon, the passengers on that plague ship." He turned to his mother. "Grandpa taught us that life is about the choices you make when things are hard. Anyone can be good when it's easy. The real test is what you do when being good might cost everything." Across the galaxy, on a council station orbiting a binary star system, Neil presented his research to a room full of diplomats and military strategists. His work over the past 6 months had become the definitive study on human tactical doctrine and psychology. "The key to understanding humans," he explained, pulling up a chart showing rescue response times, "is recognizing that they don't calculate risk the way we do. We ask ourselves if we can succeed with acceptable losses. Humans ask themselves if they can live with not trying." A Tenari diplomat raised a tentacle. "But surely they must have limits. There must be situations where even humans would say the risk is too great." Neil thought about that. He had watched humans do things that should have been impossible. He had seen them choose certain harm to prevent possible harm to others. He had documented a dozen cases where human crews had voted to take suicidal risks to save strangers. "If there are limits," he said slowly, "I haven't found them yet. The more impossible the situation, the more determined they seem to become." He pulled up a recent example. A human medical ship had flown into an active war zone to evacuate wounded civilians. Both sides in the conflict had been shooting at them. The ship had been hit 17 times but had completed its mission anyway. "They don't see obstacles as reasons to stop," Neil continued. "They see obstacles as problems to solve, and if the solution requires them to suffer or risk death, they accept that as the cost of doing what's right." The room fell silent. Finally, an elderly council member spoke. "You're saying they're fundamentally different from us, that their death world didn't just make them tough, it made them moral in a way we can't fully comprehend." "No," Neil corrected gently. "I'm saying their death world taught them the value of compassion. When every day is a struggle to survive, you learn to help each other. You learn that the person next to you is the difference between living and dying. Humans applied that lesson to the entire galaxy." He closed his presentation with a final slide. It showed the human fleet responding to distress calls across Council space. In 6 months, they had conducted 43 rescue operations. They had saved over 200,000 lives. They had lost 16 people. "We should be grateful," Neil said, "that when humans finally reached the stars, they brought their compassion with them along with their weapons." On the Relentless, now fully repaired and back on patrol, Patricia received the latest distress call. A science vessel stranded in a gravity well, life support failing, crew of 35 in immediate danger. "How far?" she asked. 14 hours at maximum burn," the navigator replied. "But ma'am, we're scheduled for leave. The crew hasn't had time off in 6 months." Patricia looked around her bridge. Every face showed exhaustion. They had earned their rest. They deserved safety and comfort and all the things that normal people got to enjoy. But 35 people were dying, and 14 hours meant they could be saved. "All hands," Patricia broadcast through the ship. "We have an SOS. I'm putting it to a vote. Those who want to respond, stay at your stations. Those who want to pass it to another ship, head to your quarters. You have 5 minutes to decide." She watched the chronometer count down. When it reached 0, she looked around the bridge. Nobody had moved. "Helm," Patricia said, feeling that familiar mix of pride and sorrow. "Set course for the science vessel, maximum burn." The Relentless turned toward the distress signal and accelerated into the dark, carrying its crew of volunteers toward another impossible rescue. Behind them, across human space, 100 other ships were doing the same thing, answering calls, saving lives, being exactly who Earth had taught them to be. Deathworlders, first responders, heroes who never thought of themselves as heroes, just people doing what needed to be done.